Hey guys, welcome back to another Shafiq University video. Today I'll be talking about immune systems and immunology. Now obviously this is a very complex topic. There's a lot of information to learn about this. Obviously there's entire careers that are made of this, but I'll attempt to give kind of a summarized view in hopefully under 20 minutes. Now, I do want to say that if you want to watch more YouTube videos on this, check out a channel called Crash Course. That guy is awesome. Um, Look at he has 3 lectures on immunology, and they're really good. So if you want to learn more in the span of 40 minutes as opposed to 20 minutes, check out this channel over here. Okay? All right. So let's talk about the 3 types of classifications, the rough classifications of types of immune system defenses. So we've got the physical barrier. This is stuff like your skin, mucous membranes. Mucus itself is used to block pathogens from coming in and also to expel pathogens from the body. We've got the innate system, which we'll talk about in more detail here. This is really the workhorse. This is the majority of the immune system itself, and so it's really the base, and other things are kind of added to it. Most of the interesting stuff happens here, even though in the previous video I called this the dumb immune system. It's dumb in the sense that it doesn't learn. So most animals have evolved a more advanced system that sits on top of the innate immune system, which is the acquired or adaptive immune system, and that's just basically the ability to learn. So you can learn about how to defend against a particular pathogen, usually like a virus, and once you have that so-called innate immunity, they call it, which is kind of confusing because it uses the word innate, but once you have that acquired immunity, let's say, then you can defend against this pathogen in the future, okay, much more easily. And we'll go through that in a little bit, okay? So interestingly enough, the only animals that have evolved, number 3 here, they have a silly name, the family of animals called the jawed vertebrates, meaning they have a mouth, vertebrates meaning they have a spinal column, and jawed means they have a mouth. So any animal that has a mouth has an acquired immune system. And that's different from, say, like insects or what have you, that I guess insects have mouths, but not in the jaw sense. Okay? All right. So let's take a little detour here. It may seem irrelevant at first, but I think it's very important. Let's take a little detour and talk about blood types. So you may have heard about different blood types. You might know your blood type as A or AB or AB positive, O negative, etc., etc. These refer to a certain type of thing that's going on at your blood cell level. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but it has a lot to do with immunology. So I'm going to ignore the plus and minus piece of it. This is the Rh system. It's a little bit more advanced. So let's just pretend that the blood types in the world are only the following: A, B, AB, and O. Okay? That will be enough to highlight the concept here. All right? So what does it mean to have an A or an AB blood type? Well, let's back up a little bit and talk about what the blood looks like. So your blood, if you can get a vial of your blood, okay, if you could spin it and separate it, and in fact that's how they do it in the centrifuge, you've got red blood cells, okay, you've got white blood cells, perhaps some other cells, but this is the majority here. And the white blood cells, this is your immune system cells, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But then the rest is what we call plasma. Now plasma is a kind of a yellowish liquid that is the fluid that's left over when you take out the cells. And this is stuff like protein. There's a lot of protein in that blood, salt, sodium, not really table salt, but sodium, potassium, other electrolytes, and so on. What's important here is that the plasma contains also um, antibodies, or as they're called, immunoglobulins. Okay, that's just another synonym for antibodies. Okay, so why is that important? Well, when we say donate blood, we're really talking about donating red blood cells. Okay, so if you're an A blood type, that means your red blood cell actually has so-called antigens on the surface of it that are of the A type or the A shape. Okay, you can imagine that the A shape looks something like this. It's just a certain physical molecular shape that has a certain signature that can be recognized. So we call this an A antigen. Now the word antigen, that's an N, believe it or not. Antigen means antibody generating. Okay, so antibody generating just means something that will elicit an antibody response. So antibodies are things that can neutralize antigens. So they're usually drawn like a Y because that's kind of the general shape. So if we zoom into that section over here, you have a specific shape, and then you have an antibody that binds to that, and it just uses the laws of physics and chemistry to bind together and then neutralize the antigen in a certain way. Okay, so if you're an A blood type, then your blood cells have the A antigen on them. Similarly, if you're a B blood type, you have the B shape. Now I don't know what the B shape looks like, whatever it is, but I'm just going to write B over here. Okay, that means your spike protein, kind of like the virus spike protein, like you've been seeing in the coronavirus videos and images. These little spike proteins are ways for the cell to interact with the environment, or the virus to interact with the environment, but they also have carry the signature of the virus on them. Okay, so if you're an AB blood type, guess what? You have A's and B's on your spikes. Okay, and then if you're an O blood type, you have essentially no spikes. Sometimes drawn like this, empty spikes. There's no antigen on them. Okay, so why is that important? Well, if you're an A blood type, your plasma, okay, if you recall, your fluid in your blood has antibodies for the B type. Interesting, huh? So if you're a person with A blood running through your veins, then you have B antibodies as well in that blood, which means that the B antibodies, if they detect a blood cell with the B antigen, then it will attack it and it will actually cause an immune response. Okay, so if you notice, obviously your blood has to be complementary in the sense that whatever plasma you have must be compatible with whatever blood cells you have. Okay, so here's another example. If you're an AB blood type, like myself, I'm actually AB positive. So if you look at that, you'll see that the plasma here has no antibodies, which is kind of interesting. Because if I had an A or a B type antibody, then I will attack my own blood, and that's not good. Okay? Now, what would you suspect the O blood type plasma looks like? So if you have the O type of blood cell with no antigens, guess what the plasma has? The plasma has both A and B antibodies. Maybe we'll draw them like this. So this is pretty interesting because this is why we take blood type compatibility seriously when we donate blood. If you are an A blood type body and then you receive blood, oops, that's an A. If you receive blood from a B type, then, if you're an A blood type person, you have B antibodies floating around in your blood. If you somehow get a transfusion of B blood type from somebody, guess what's going to happen? This antibody is going to bind to this antigen and cause a crazy immune response. Okay? So this is why we call the O blood type universal donors. They can donate this blood to anybody because it's safe. It has no antigens on it. And ABs are universal acceptors because they have no antibodies in their blood. They can accept blood from anybody. Pretty cool, huh? Also, a corollary of this, obviously, is that plasma donations are reversed. So if you are a universal donor blood type, you can't give any plasma because your plasma contains all the antibodies, okay? If you are an AB blood type, you can't donate any blood in the sense blood cells, but you can donate your plasma because it has no antibodies in it, okay? Very cool. So why is this important to immunology? Well, this is kind of a core tenet of immune systems. You're attacking your enemies and you're protecting the friends, friend or foe. There's a lot of like detection going on of like, is this a friendly thing or this is an enemy thing? So really, friend or foe is an important kind of mechanism going on everywhere in your immune system. Is this cell a good guy or a bad guy? Is this thing that's coming from the outside a good guy or a bad guy? Is this part of my own body or is it part of the external body? So this turns out to be a very difficult task to do, and this is why you have problems with this. When this goes bad, you have stuff like, no immune response, which would kill you. Or you'd have stuff like, autoimmune diseases, which is overly active and it's your immune system misunderstanding the friend part and thinking that it's a foe or an enemy. Okay? All right. So let's very broadly just talk about some pieces of the innate system that are important. So you've got all kinds of cells in here, and we don't have to go through all the types, but there's a broad category of cells that deal with the invaders kind of immediately in a broad general fashion. One example is the also broad category of phagocytes, which just really means to eat, or phagocytes, however you want to pronounce that. So, a sub-example is, macrophages. You've probably heard of those. These are badass cells that eat bacteria. They actually literally engulf them. So the bacteria, if this is a phagocyte, and if a bacteria comes along, usually much smaller, and the phagocyte will actually engulf this and then release enzymes to destroy it and dissolve it, and literally digesting it, which is pretty cool. But all of these kinds of things happen, and there's all sorts of responses. But the important part is that a lot of the times, in order for the acquired immune system to know about some pathogen, then these phagocytes or these innate system cells need to present a piece of this antigen to the acquired system. So what do I mean by that? So if you think about it, you need to kind of take the antigen and process the information about it and then present it to some cell so it can learn. Okay, so here's an example of a situation that can happen. Got some virus going on. Okay, along comes let's say, one of the cool cells as well of the innate system called a dendritic cell. Kind of looks like a neuron. That's where it gets its name from. It engulfs these, okay, digests them, but not only that, it will actually take part of the viral DNA and present it on something on the outside of the cell called MHC complex, or just MHC, complex 1 or complex 2. This stands for major histocompatibility complex, I believe, but it's essentially a thing that displays, hey, look, this is an interesting thing. Let some cells from the acquired immune system, let's say a T cell will be floating around and will come over and it will bind to that MHC complex and literally learn. It will transfer this information and it will learn what this pattern looks like, so that if it sees this elsewhere in other cells, it can attack it. Very cool. So you've got, let's go back to the innate versus acquired immune response or immune system. So cell-wise, you've got stuff here, like I said, like phagocytes, uh, which are many. And you've got all sorts of other cells, one of them being the dendritic cells, which are key in transferring information over to the acquired immune system. Very broadly speaking, though, on the acquired side, there's two types of cells. There's B cells, and then there's T cells. And there's many subtypes of these guys that are involved in various functions. And there's a whole slew of kind of coordination between both sides of the army here that results in kind of a immune response. But very quickly, the B cells are the ones that secrete antibodies. So they're the ones that eventually, if you're a B cell and you're the one that there's antibodies on the surface of B cells, and they go around trying to lock on to a specific antigen that's perhaps floating around in the body. Once they do, they start multiplying like crazy. They freak out like, oh, I got one. And they start multiplying like crazy and then also secreting this antibody into your blood or plasma. So these things break off and then float around in the antibody, and eventually the hope is, if there's virus floating around, then these things will bind to the virus and deactivate them. Or even if there's virus budding out of a cell that's been infected, let's say this is an infected cell, and it's got virus inside it, a lot of times the cell will display the virus protein in its own MHC complex, if you remember. And if this infected cell is kind of announcing to the world, hey guys, I'm infected, watch out, the B cells can, if they bump into this cell, they can latch onto this MHC, learn that there's a viral infection, freak out, start producing antibodies. Okay? So, this takes a while to happen. Once your body has this antibodies in it, it takes a while for that to happen. Why? Well, a main reason is because the process is relatively random. And so a B cell has these antibodies on its surface, but it's just trying to learn. So it's got different shapes, whatever the shape is. It's just trying to learn randomly what pathogens it might detect, and so it'll just keep trying. And there's tons of B cells, millions and billions of T cells, B cells trying this over and over. And then once they lock on, they activate, they become activated, and you launch an immune response. And then some of these B cells that go on to fight, the majority of them go on to fight and then eventually die. And then some of them become, memory cells. But the point is, it's a random process to generate this antibody over here. It's kind of luck of a draw. Now, obviously, it's a numbers game. So if your immune system is, quote, healthy and you're somewhat lucky, you'll eventually you'll eventually iterate enough until you get a version of this antibody that binds to the virus, let's say the coronavirus here. And so, you'll eventually launch an immune response. But some of the difficulty with coronavirus is that might come too late, or it might not be at the right amounts, or whatever. And so there's ways the coronavirus can evade the immune system for a while, so that the immunity comes a little too late, and then you've got problems. Okay? So I know, very basic intro. There's tons of details I'd like to go into, obviously. Maybe I'll do another one, part 2 or part 3, but this is kind of a very basic idea of what your immune system does. If you have questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll see you next time.